This video was created using artificial intelligence, AI, for educational and narrative purposes. All characters and events are fictionalized representations inspired by historical realities. Viewer discretion is advised.
1430 BC. Ancient Egypt was living through its golden age. The fertile banks of the Nile overflowed with wealth. Cities prospered, temples rose. And while pharaohs ruled with iron fists and divine promises, a new symbol of power began to rise. But it did not speak. It did not build. It did not fight with weapons. It neighed. For the first time in Egyptian history, horses ceased to be rare imports and became a vital part of the empire. They were not born in Egypt. They came from the Asian steppes, brought by foreign invaders. But now they were central to the state machine, a tool of war, transportation, status, and prestige. In this video, we will explore in unprecedented detail what life was like for an Egyptian horse over 3,000 years ago. Where did they live? Who cared for them? How were they treated? What did they eat? And what role did they play in the daily life of pharaonic Egypt? Get ready to embark on an archaeological and historical journey that reveals not only the story of men, but also of the animals that helped shape the destiny of an empire. If you enjoy content that uncovers the hidden side of history, especially when it involves animals that change civilizations, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like to support the project and comment below on what you'd like to see in our next video. Dogs in the Roman Empire, elephants in ancient India. Your suggestion might become our next documentary. The relationship between Egypt and horses began relatively late in the historical timeline. For thousands of years, Egyptians relied on donkeys as their primary load-bearing and transport animals. Horses were completely unknown. That changed around 1700 BC when the Hyksos, a people of Asian origin, invaded the Nile Delta. These invaders brought with them a revolutionary weapon, the horse-drawn chariot. It was a decisive strategic advantage. The Egyptians, caught off guard, were easily defeated, but that defeat planted a seed. When the Egyptians finally expelled the Hyksos, they decided to adopt the new technology, and with it, the animal that made it possible. By around 1500 BC, during the reign of Thutmose III, Egypt already possessed hundreds of horses. By 1430 BC, the presence of horses was common among the elite. They were used in military campaigns, royal hunts, and ceremonial parades. However, ownership was restricted to the wealthiest and most powerful. Breeding horses required significant resources. They were not naturally adapted to the Egyptian climate. They needed shelter, a controlled diet, and veterinary care. This limited their use to the upper classes. Thus, the horse became a direct symbol of prestige. Whoever had one had power. In 1430 BC, horses played an especially important role in the Egyptian army. Each chariot unit was composed of 2 horses pulling a light vehicle, with space for 2 people, a driver and an archer. These chariots were used for rapid attacks, reconnaissance, and chasing down fleeing enemies. Archaeological sources and mural paintings show battle scenes with Egyptian chariots in formation. The horses were trained to obey precise commands, even in the chaos of combat. Their endurance and agility determined the effectiveness of the troops, but this came at a cost. The training was exhaustive. Horses began their military careers young. Those that failed to show enough endurance were discarded, replaced, or euthanized. Those that stood out, however, were treated with near reverential care. Royal and military horses were kept in specialized stables, often attached to palaces or military centers. Excavations in Pyrameses, a later city but with structures similar to those of the 15th century BC, revealed complexes with organized stalls, feeding areas, and training zones. Ventilation was strategically planned with high openings to allow air circulation and minimize heat. The floors were covered with straw to absorb urine and feces, and slaves or workers were assigned exclusively to cleaning duties. These stables housed between 20 and 40 horses per facility. Each animal had a designated, enclosed space. They were identified by names, marks, or symbols, and detailed records were kept of their origin, behavior, and assigned function. Caring for a horse in ancient Egypt was no simple task. Horses required constant attention. Their caretakers were usually trained slaves or specialized workers, referred to as chariot drivers or stable keepers. These caregivers were responsible for feeding the horses 2 to 3 times a day, brushing their coats, cleaning their hooves, checking for injuries, and applying oil-based ointments to prevent skin diseases. They also performed massages to relieve muscle tension and applied rudimentary physiotherapy techniques after long campaigns. The most valuable animals, especially those used by royalty, had their own personal caretaker. It was a position of great responsibility, as failing to care for a pharaoh's horse could result in severe punishment, including beatings or dismissal. During the height of Egypt in 1430 BC, feeding a horse was much more than a simple routine task. In an arid environment like the Nile Valley, where every grain was precious, maintaining a large animal required planning and resources. The diet of an Egyptian horse was carefully controlled and consisted primarily of barley and crushed wheat, which provided the essential energy base for daily activities. In addition, caretakers offered green barley hay, harvested before full maturity, and occasionally dried fruits like dates and figs to supplement energy. Water was a crucial resource. Each horse consumed an average of 30 liters per day. This required constant access to clean sources, and during times of drought or war, logistics became even more complex. Elite horses, especially those used in ceremonies or belonging to the pharaoh's army, received extra care. Records indicate the use of vegetable oils and herbs in the diets of these animals, aiming to strengthen their bodies and maintain a shiny coat, particularly for public occasions or festivals. But nutrition was only the beginning. A horse's true value lay in its ability to be trained. Training began early. Around 2 years of age, foals were separated from their mothers and began a meticulous disciplinary process. First, they learned to walk with reins, then to respond to sound commands, and gradually to adapt to the constant presence of humans. Over time, they were introduced to loud noises, crowds, uneven sandy terrain, and chariots. By age 4, they underwent physical tests to measure endurance, obedience, and speed. Only the strongest and most balanced continued to military training. Those showing excessive docility, emotional instability, or weak resistance were removed and, in some cases, put down. Training methods included voice commands, light whips, and sound instruments like flutes. The goal was not to inflict pain, but to shape firm and reliable behavior, essential in war scenarios or ceremonial parades. A rebellious horse was a liability. A predictable horse was a valuable tool. In Egyptian society, few moments were as symbolic as royal parades. and in all of them, horses held a prominent place. The animals were adorned with painted leather harnesses, cloths embroidered with hieroglyphs, and in some cases, polished metal plates that reflected the sunlight. In public ceremonies, especially religious festivals, the pharaoh appeared in chariots pulled by 2 or 4 perfectly synchronized horses, projecting an image of dominance, order, and strength. The horses were not merely means of transportation, but visual extensions of royal power. Their appearances in the temples of Karnak, Luxor, and in battle inscriptions like those of Megiddo are proof of their importance. In many of these depictions, horses appear upright, expressive, and fully integrated into the visual narrative of the pharaoh as warrior and divine chosen one. Beyond ceremonies, there was another setting where elite horses excelled: royal hunts. These events, organized around the Nile or in desert regions, were more than leisure activities. They served as practical training, demonstrations of skill, and even symbolic rituals of dominance over nature. Horses selected for hunts had to be fast, agile, and extremely obedient. They were used to chase wild animals such as antelopes, hyenas, and on special occasions, even lions. The chariots used in these events were lightweight, designed to reach high speeds with stability. The pharaoh himself was the main archer, shooting arrows while in motion. A scribe from the time of Amenhotep II wrote that the king could strike more than 30 targets in a single hunt, and attributed much of this feat to horses trained with near superhuman precision. After events like these, the horses were treated with utmost care. They received baths with perfumed water, had their coats brushed with fine linen fabrics, and were fed special fruits as a reward. Those who stood out were given personal names, engraved on leather medallions or recorded in official papyri. Among the most common names were references to speed, strength, and spirituality, like North Wind, Son of the Sun, or the One Who Flies. Naming a horse meant giving it identity, recognizing its function, and eternalizing its connection to the empire. Many of these animals were treated almost as members of the royal court. The most valuable horses were even portrayed in murals alongside their owners, and when they died, especially if they had participated in wars or important ceremonies, they received burials with offerings, amulets, and sometimes small sculptures representing their chariots. Some tombs discovered in Thebes contained horse skeletons accompanied by funerary objects, a clear sign that these animals transcended the status of mere servants. They were companions of power, participants in glory, and above all, living symbols of Egypt's expansion. Caring for a horse in ancient Egypt required more than just feeding and training. There was a clear concern for the health and well-being of these animals, especially those directly tied to the pharaoh or the military forces. Although veterinary medicine was far from modern standards, the Egyptians developed effective practices based on observation, tradition, and natural resources. Experienced caretakers applied ointments made from castor oil, honey, and crushed herbs to treat superficial wounds, skin irritations, and even mild muscular injuries. Massages with heated stones were used to relieve tension in the legs and lower back after long walks or intense training days. They also used Nile mud mixed with cold water as a compress on inflamed areas. In more severe cases, such as fractures or respiratory problems, the animal was isolated, removed from service, and received intensive treatment with rest and a special diet. If there was no improvement, The horse was ritually sacrificed, often accompanied by prayers to the gods who protected animals. Dental care was also taken into account. Horses underwent regular mouth inspections, and records exist of tooth filing using abrasive stones to correct misalignments or prevent internal injuries. Manes and tails were brushed daily, not just for appearance, but to avoid lice or fungal infestations. Ticks were removed with bronze tweezers, and perhaps most surprisingly, some horses used by elite members received protective amulets hanging from their harnesses or attached to their foreheads with resin, intended to ward off the evil eye or spiritual attacks, common beliefs at the time. Despite all this care, the lifespan of an Egyptian horse was not long. On average, they lived 12 to 15 years, but those serving in military campaigns often died earlier. When a horse died, the treatment of its body varied according to its status. Common animals were buried discreetly outside urban areas. Royal horses, or those that had served in important wars, were buried in ceremonies that included chants, offerings, and in some cases, miniature sculptures representing the animal in its ideal form. Archaeologists have found individual horse tombs with inscriptions and even dedications from their caretakers, which indicates a strong emotional bond between man and animal. The death of a prestigious horse was recorded in official papyri, and in some instances, scribes mentioned the impact of the loss on the stability of royal chariots. In a document dating from the reign of Thutmose IV, there is mention of replacing an entire pair of royal horses after the death of one of them, as a way to maintain the spiritual balance of the team. This shows that horses were not viewed merely as a source of traction, but as beings connected to the fate of the monarchy itself. As the centuries passed, especially after the New Kingdom period, the military use of horses began to decline. Wars changed, new weapons emerged, and the introduction of camels, much more resistant to the desert climate and cheaper to maintain, gradually began to replace horses in long-distance tasks. From the 7th century BC onward, horses were used almost exclusively by the elite for ceremonial, sporting, or status purposes. The animal that once symbolized the pharaoh's strength on the battlefield now galloped only in private gatherings or symbolic hunts on noble estates. Even so, the legacy of horses in ancient Egypt remains etched into the walls of temples, recorded in papyri, and depicted in artistic representations that have endured for millennia. They were part of the empire's military revolution, territorial expansion, and the very image of the pharaoh's authority. But they were also silent companions, treated with honor, respect, and even affection by those who dedicated their lives to their care. Today, when we observe the reliefs on the walls of Luxor or the frescoes preserved in the Cairo Museum, we can see not just art, but traces of a complex coexistence between humans and horses, one marked by demand, reverence, and mutual dependence. In a civilization where almost everything was symbolic, the horse became, above all, a reflection of the greatness and contradictions of ancient Egypt. And if we look closely, we will see that the story of Egyptian horses is not merely a story about animals. It is also a story about power, about nature being tamed to serve the empire, and about how human beings transform even the most majestic of creatures into tools of ambition and glory. But ultimately, it is also a story of care, connection, and respect, even in times as ancient as 1430 BC.